All right, in this week, we begin an era of music called the Baroque Era. In history, it's also known as the Age of Kings, and we're looking at a time frame of approximately 1600 to 1750. So, this again is a little PowerPoint overview of what you're going to be reading about and studying about in your enjoyment of music book. And the Baroque Era it's a very interesting era in Europe, has some very particular social and cultural characteristics. First of all, the era saw it was an era of peace and prosperity. For years and years, a lot of the countries in Europe had been warring with each other, but for the most part, there was peace. And so what you had were these different royalty in the different countries um, trying to attract the best architects, composers, artists, the best of everything to their palaces to kind of show off how great their country was, whether it was England or Italy or France, Germany. The Baroque era saw a very strict social hierarchy. It was a class system that was very established and in place by the time we got to the beginning of this era. And you basically had the royalty, which was the ruling class of the Baroque era, and that could include anything from the king and queen down through all the aristocrats, the um, dukes and barons and princes and princesses. And then you had a middle class, which was just all the regular people, and there was a lower class. And in Europe, during this time period, if you were born into one of these classes, that was pretty much the class you stayed in generation after generation. And you could always go down the ladder, but you could never go up the ladder. Of course, the royalty always remained royalty. This era saw elaborate rules of code and conduct, societal rules of how to behave. They're very elaborate. And what I have here, I want to show you how the art evolved from medieval through the Renaissance to the Baroque. In medieval art, you can see kind of unrealistic, very kind of one-dimensional. When we get to the Renaissance, Renaissance art is more human, more perspective. But Baroque art is all about drama and emotion. So if you ever see any Baroque art, you're going to see a lot of action, drama, complexity. There's a lot of a detail in Baroque art. And like I said, Renaissance art is very passive and peaceful, but Baroque art, there's quite a lot of action and drama in Baroque art. And here's some Baroque art with a lot of ornamentation, a lot of detail. And this goes true for all the Baroque art. And Baroque art expresses emotion. You will find in a lot of Baroque things, a lot of this ornamentation, elaborate details. You see it in architecture, some Baroque architecture. You'll see it in Baroque furniture, very elaborate and detailed. You'll see it in fashion. And you'll see all this reflected in the music of the Baroque era. Just as all those things are elaborate and ornamented and decorated, you'll find it in Baroque music. And so all Baroque music has the same kind of characteristics. It's very elaborate and decorated, like all the art at the time is. There's a lot of rhythmic vitality in the music you'll be listening to, whether it's slow or fast. It feels like there's a lot of rhythmic life. Very importantly, there's a thick polyphonic texture. All the music you can hear a lot of musical lines laid on top of each other. The music is designed to arouse extreme emotion, and most importantly, Baroque music has something called the basso continuo, What is the basso continuo? It's pretty much the foundation of Baroque music, the harmonic foundation. Um, it was usually harpsichord, cello, and lute. I like to liken them to the rhythm section of a jazz group. They lay down the harmonies, and on top of that is put the melodies and the various combinations of upper instruments, but they're the foundation. Some of the new kinds of music you'll be reading about in your chapters are the sonata. That's a new kind of thing, and that is a composition for a solo instrument with a simple, usually a keyboard, accompaniment. And it has four movements, which means that the sonata has four separate sections that are contrasting with each other, but they're all connected through some kind of a theme or key, things like that. And the first movement in the Baroque sonata is always slow, and then the soloist plays something fast. Then there's a break. Then the soloist plays something slow, and then finally the fourth movement is a fast movement. So that's what movements are. They're big sections that each have their own tempos. We see the beginnings of the concerto, and that's the composition for a solo instrument with the orchestra as equal partners. So there's a dialogue between a soloist and an orchestra, and this has three movements: fast, slow, fast. So if you were to go see a piano concerto, the pianist is the star of the show, but it has a musical conversation with the orchestra. And the first movement, fast, shows off the soloist. Slow, they get to play something soft and beautiful, and finally they finish with a fast, showy movement. Baroque era also sees dance suites, which are very short works. Each piece is maybe 3 minutes long. They have a rhythmic dance feel because back in the day, the aristocracy loved to have banquets and ballroom dances, and everybody knew the certain kind of dance steps to various kinds of dances. So these dance suites are all songs that people originally danced to. You will hear a fugue by Johann Sebastian Bach, and the fugue is a very advanced polyphonic keyboard composition. It can be for harpsichord or organ. The one you'll be listening to on your listening assignment is an organ composition. Baroque sees the beginning of the opera, which is a large stage production, and whatever the story is, the entire story is sung. And it includes all these musical things like duets, trios, quartets, and the aria is a huge part of the opera, where the soloist comes out and sings some beautiful song all by themselves. And the recitative, you'll find it in opera. It's kind of sung connections between songs to songs to songs. Later, in something like American musical theater, they dropped all that stuff and just spoke the words in between. So opera begins in the Baroque. You'll read about the oratorio, and you'll be listening to a bit of an oratorio, and that's a large unstaged opera, which is it's telling you a story, and it's just, but the thing is, it's a sacred story. It's something religious or biblical about it, and it has everything an opera has. The only difference is there's no sets, no costumes, no scenery. You'll be reading about three of the major composers of the era. Antonio Vivaldi, an Italian composer who's the master of the Baroque concerto. And his most famous work is The Four Seasons. Those are four violin concertos, and each one describes a season. And the most famous one is spring, and you'll be listening to that and reading about that. And most importantly about this work is it's the first example of program music. Music that specifically is telling you a story. You'll read about George Frederick Handel, and one of the great Baroque masters and famous for dance suites and oratorios. And you will be listening to his oratorio, The Messiah, at least parts of The Messiah, one of the most famous oratorios ever written. And you will also be reading about Johann Sebastian Bach, one of the three greatest composers of all time, and he composed thousands of works. And if you could get CDs of nothing but Bach, and you'd recognize a lot of the different things. And besides writing unbelievably great music, it was Johann Sebastian Bach that really defined the rules of music in terms of harmony, how the chords move to each other, why do they move each other, scales, keys, anything that is musically related. Bach set the rules, and composers after Bach kind of went toward him to study how did he do it and why does music work the way it does. So these are all the things you're going to be listening to. I think you'll enjoy the week. A lot of reading. So pace yourself. Stay up on it. Have a great week, guys.